It's our third day of building this Flutter app, and we're going to jump right into it. So where we left off yesterday, we had a quote rendered on the screen. In theory, that quote should have changed today since it changes daily, so we'll check and make sure that's the case. And then on top of that, we will clean up some of that code that we wrote, introduce a pattern, probably a view model pattern that is hand-rolled, and take things from there. Look to get some user input and figure out what's next after that. Let's get started. Pardon my tabs. Okay. Great. So this was our quote yesterday. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. Fantastic quote, but it should be gone. However, this future builder doesn't trigger again until we rebuild this widget tree, and there's nothing triggering a rebuild, right? Nothing has changed. This is all static. This feature has completed, and it may change, it may not. So if we run this again, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, Marcus Aurelius. Great, we have a new quote. Let's run it one more time just to make sure it doesn't change, because it should be, this quote should be tied to today. So it'll change again tomorrow, just like it changed from yesterday's. Okay. So there's a couple options here. This is kind of messy for a lot of reasons. So the first thing is we load all of our quotes, and then we pass those get passed to the builder here. And then the builder says, hey, if that snapshot has data, so if there are quotes, then build a quote selector and then select it for the given date. This is logic that we don't necessarily need in our widget tree, so we're going to remove it from our widget tree. There's a lot of really good patterns that you could use for this. There is, I'm a big fan of block. Let's pull that up really quick. In fact, this is without a doubt my favorite pattern. But it might be a little overkill for what we're doing, and I want to write more code so you have more opportunity to learn. So we're not going to use a library. Some other really popular ones that kind of solve this problem are provider. Oh, where's provider? There it is. And riverpod. There's a couple more like getx, which could be kind of used for this. It might just be called get. Yeah, it is called get. I've not actually used this one much. But anyways, we're going to build a hand-rolled view model solution from scratch. So let's give this a new name because it's currently called my homepage state, and we don't really want it to be called homepage, right? It's not a meaningful name for it. So we're going to rename this to quote view. And you can see by using the rename function in VS Code, it also renamed the reference up here, which is great. It also renamed the quote view, or the state, to quote view state, which is fantastic. That's actually, I think, somewhat new functionality. Okay, so this has been updated. We're also going to pull this out into a file. So I'm going to copy all of this, cut it, and then I'm going to go into our quotes folder and add a new file called quoteview.dart. I paste this. I've got a lot of red. If we click on stateful widget and then use code actions, so command dot on Mac, or you can just hover over it and then maybe go to quick fix and then import Flutter material. We have a couple more things we need to clean up. Namely, the quote loader is not imported and the quote selector is not imported. Great, so now that those are imported, we go back to our main file and then we import our quote view. Now that we've done a little bit of refactoring, this keeps our main app actually really thin, and then we can delegate everything else to views within our application. I'm going to restart this, and I just want to make sure it still loads. Great, it does. I'm going to go create a new file. I'm going to call this quote view model.dart. This view model pattern is something that I've kind of come up with for small scenarios, mainly this one, to be honest. Again, I do usually use block for most of my widget level state management, my view level state management, that type of stuff. But I think a view model will work really nicely in this case. So we'll go ahead and do a view model. So I'm going to create a new class called quote view model. It's going to have a couple different properties. So the first one is going to be state. So we have state, and that's going to be a new stream dot I want a broadcast stream, creates an empty broadcast stream. Okay, I think that's what I would like. And this will be public, so we'll use this in our quote view, and we'll react to the state of that stream with a stream builder. And again, if you've used block, that pattern is actually really similar to what you do with a block builder. So we'll kind of do the same thing here. So now we want to have a view model function called load quotes. And we want to do a couple different things. We're going to reference our quote view because we want to call quote loader.load. I just copied that, I didn't cut it. We'll come back to that in a minute. And I kind of know what we're wanting to do here, so I'm not gonna copy and paste again, but we want to load our quotes. We want to select a quote using our quote selector, quote selector, quotes dot select date time. So we can do date time dot now. One thing you may want to do is if you wanted to create a calendar that let people pick future days or previous days or anything like that, you would want to take in the date here. So load quotes would take in a date, and then that way the view could send whatever date is currently selected. If we have time, we may build that too. We'll find out. We have a red squiggle. This is an error. So this tells us that a future list quote can't be assigned to a type of list quote. That's because, as we saw yesterday, the quote loader returns a future. So we can await this, and for us to await this, we have to make this method async. Okay, this doesn't actually do anything, right? Like select returns a quote, but we're not returning it. We don't want to return it. In fact, we want a selected quote. And then what we'd like to do is say state dot, let's see, I want to broadcast this. I'm going to pull up the documentation because it's been a while since I've done this. So Dart stream broadcast. Okay, there's a tutorial right here on the language, Dart language site for streams. Streams are really powerful. Excuse me. Streams are really powerful, and there's something to get very comfortable with, ideally. I have done a little bit with streams. And I was hoping that this documentation might have more examples. Let's see if we can find something that references exactly what we're looking for. Can be listened to more than once. The stream returned by the stream is a broadcast stream. So, okay, this is a stream dynamic. Oh, so we don't have a type specified for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple classes. So we have one called quote view model state. This is actually going to be an empty class. This is what you would call like a marker class. And the reason that we have this empty class is that we're going to extend it. So this stream will take in a quote view model state. And we'll create a couple new states, such as quote view model loaded, class quote view model loading, class quote view model failed. And if you've ever written blocks before, this should look really familiar. So our loaded method will have a quote, right? So we'll have final quote. And then we can give this a constant constructor because we know that if our quote's final, and then we know that if we pass a quote to quote view model loaded. We don't need 2 different instances of that in memory. We can just work with one. If that's a little confusing, just know that generally when you can use a constant constructor, you should use a constant constructor. We'll make this required. And you don't have to use the named arguments here. I really prefer them. That's one of my favorite things about Dart. So I use them all over the place. Now we need to extend quote view model state. Extends, there we go. And it does not like, oh, that this doesn't have a constant constructor. So, okay. Quote view model state. So we can provide this a constant constructor so that this is now valid. Basically, you can't have a constant constructor on something that extends a class without a constant constructor. Another option would be that we could do like an abstract interface class. Let's try this. And instead of that, we can do implements. And in theory, we don't need this anymore. We don't. Fantastic. So let's take this approach. This is a little cleaner and a little newer, so let's stick with the newest. If it fails, we might have like an error message that we want to show. And then we don't really have anything we want to show when it's loading. We just want to know that it is loading, and that's what that class is for. So let's add quote view model failed. Let's make this required too. Okay, excellent. So we've created these classes. We'll use those down here. So we want state, and I'm gonna do a little bit of searching through this. As I said, it's been a while since I've done writing to streams. This is as broadcast stream on listen. Huh. Dart write to stream. What am I doing wrong? Oh, that's right. We should use stream controllers. Okay, we'll use a stream controller. Sorry, let's go back to this documentation. There's really good documentation on creating streams and using a stream controller. That's probably what we want to do in this case. So we can see, do they have an example? Interesting. I guess, yeah, another option is that this returns a stream. So you can use an async with the star symbol to return a string. So async returns a future, async with a star returns a stream, which gives you access to this yield keyword. So anything that you yield would output on that stream. But we don't want to necessarily return a new stream every time. We want a single stream for our state. Let's do a little bit more research with stream controllers. And the best way to do research is to just try it out. So let's do stream controller. Does this need a type? I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and remove this. It does need a type. Let's pass one in. We said this was quote view model state. And if you're a little unfamiliar with inheritance, well, yeah, okay, a little bit of inheritance. So because every one of these states right here implement this quote view model state, this is a common denominator between these three states. And because it's a common denominator, we can give this type to the stream controller, and that allows it to broadcast any of these three states, which is exactly what we want, right? There are 3 different classes to model 3 different states, but we need them to all fit into the same stream controller. So now that we've switched our stream to a stream controller, we can see if we probably want add, right? Or do we want the sync? Sends a data event. Okay, listeners receive this event in a later microtask. That sounds like what we want. So let's do a couple different things. We're going to take and add to the state multiple times. So we'll add loading, quote view model loading. And then once we have our quote, we'll do, excuse me again, quote view model loaded. And then our quote will be our selected quote. Now, we haven't talked about our error state yet, and we saw many times now that loading quotes can fail. So let's go ahead and prepare for our error state. So we're going to try to do all this, and if we catch an exception, then let's do state.add. Oh, that is right. Sorry, state.add quote view model failed error message e dot sure toString. This is not going to be the prettiest error message, and in fact, we'll leave a little to do right here. Give the user a meaningful error message. Another thing we can do is look at this state, and if it's failed, we could give the user the ability to swipe down to refresh to try again, and that might be something we'll do too. So I'll make a note here. Should we give the user the ability to swipe down to refresh? Okay, so we have our three different states. As soon as you call load quotes, it's going to trigger the loading state. It'll load the quotes, it'll try to load the quotes, try to select a quote, and then try to emit a new state with the loaded quote. If it catches an error, it will, at any point during the try, it will instead call or emit a new state called quote view model failed. Let's clean up this now. So we have a future builder. I'm going to leave this in place as we migrate. So we're going to use a stream builder, and our stream is quote view model dot state, right? Here's the caveat. We're creating a new instance of quote view model as we go. So that's not going to work. So what we want instead is to take this, replace it with quote view model in lowercase. So this is pointing to a variable that we haven't defined yet. We'll scroll up and we'll define it. In our state, we have a final quote view model equals quote view model. This view model will be instantiated once per state. So in our case, once. And then as we work with state here, we can trigger that load. So for example, we have quote view model state dot stream. Remember, state is, we're exposing a stream controller for state. We'll fix that in just a second. Generally, you don't want to expose a stream controller because this means that other things can mess with the stream. They can add values to the stream. And instead, you just want to expose the stream. We'll clean that up in just a second. So now we have a builder function, just like before. It takes in a context, and it takes in a snapshot. This is going to look really similar, right? So much, in fact, that we can grab all of this, and then we can plug this in right here out of our future builder and into our stream builder. And we just have a couple things we need to change, right? So technically, our stream could have an error, or we could emit an error in our stream. So if it has error or has data, and, so we'll make this an and, snapshot.data is quote view model failed. Then we can show our error state. So there's two different error types, right? Our stream could error, or we could return, our stream could execute successfully, but the result of that stream have an error state. If you don't want to do this and you just want to do the has error approach, you can, and you can go here, and instead of add, you can do add error, right? I like this, so I'm going to keep it this way. It helps me differentiate between errors with the stream itself and errors with the calculations of values that get put into the stream. Ideally, we might even want to break these out and show different error messages in that case, but it's fine for now. This gets cleaned up a lot, right? So if it has data, then and snapshot.data is quote view model loaded. Now we know that this is a quote view model loaded state. We might have to type assert this, so we'll do that. But we can remove all of this because we know our view model is now selecting our quote for us, right? So now we can say something like final quote equals snapshot.data. And we do have to type assert this. Right? Am I wrong? Quote view model loaded. Oh, I had a typo. I had quite view model loaded instead of quote view model loaded. And then we know that we want the quote, right? So the reason this is a little weird, this is supposed to be getting better in Dart as we go, but since this is a property of this, even though we're type checking it here, so the only way this if could actually execute is if it has data and this data is a quote view model loaded. In theory, we shouldn't have to type assert this here because this body can't execute unless this is true. In reality, Dart's a little finicky on that. What we could do if we wanted to is that we could pull data out right here. And then what we could do is if we just have this, like so, it would work. And the reason why is that Dart is able to promote this. It's called type promotion. It knows that in this case, data is a quote view model loaded in this closure, so you can treat it as one. I'm going to undo these changes for now. There's a couple issues with that, mainly that data might be null. So we'll leave that as is, and we'll just do the type assertion right here on line 88. Okay, and then we still are returning a circular progress indicator. If we wanted to, we could wrap this in an if and check the state, and if the state is quote view model loading, show the circular progress indicator. In our case, if it's not one of these two, we want to show that indicator, so we'll just leave it as is. Okay, I'm going to refresh. I've done that quite a few times now. We can see that it's in a loading state. Well, why is that? We have a couple more things we need to do. So the first thing is our stream controller does not have a default state. Because it does not have a default state, it doesn't have data, and it's not loaded, and it's not failed, which means it hits this. So we're getting a progress indicator. That's a happy little accident that we're getting a progress indicator when technically that's what we want, but we're not telling our stream controller to do that. So what we can do here is Dart has the ability to do .add. Sorry, that was mostly nonsense. Dot allows you to call a method. So .add would call a method called add. Add says call that add method, but whatever the return type is, void. I don't care. Ignore the return type of this. This is great for one-off events. So in our case, we're going to add quote view model loading. Okay, so we create a new stream controller, and when it gets created, we add the initial event quote view model loading. Now, the main issue is we're not actually calling this load quotes. So in our quote view, let's go back to that. We have so many comments that I need to remove. We have our quote view model. We have our build method. We have a method called increment counter. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. We're not using any of the counter stuff anymore. So let's go ahead and clean that up. We can remove the floating action button because we don't need that. Actually, let's keep the floating action button. We might use that for the add your thoughts to this quote type thing. So instead, this function no longer exists. So let's give it just an empty function that is stubbed out. Oops, and that needs to be that. This function won't do anything, so when you press this floating action button, nothing happens. That's fine. We'll get back to that in probably a later video at this point. Okay, so we've cleaned this up a little bit. I'm going to remove this comment too. You can keep them if you'd like. It's just making it a lot for me to scroll through. And this one, and this one. Okay. Man, so many comments. Okay, now I can kind of see most of our widget tree all at once, which is great. So state has a bunch of lifecycle methods. I'm going to pull these up in a tab, show you how to get to them. Flutter state lifecycle methods. Stateful widget lifecycle, flutterbyexample.com. The lifecycle has the following simplified steps: create state, mounted, init state, did change dependencies, build, did update widget, set state, deactivate, dispose, mounted equals false. I feel like I might have these on my blog in a more thought out post. Nope, I've got React lifecycle methods, not Flutters. There's information on them here. I really wish they had a diagram that shows how they're used. Let me see if I can find one. I guarantee someone has built one. No, pretty picture of a tree, but not a diagram. Oh, state object diagram. Yes, okay, beautiful. And medium paywall. Okay, so create state gets called, then init state gets called. Did change dependencies gets called whenever dependencies are changed. This can be used to check if dependencies actually were changed. So for example, if maybe the dependency that you have is the same object as before, maybe you don't want to actually do anything. If they do change, the widget gets marked as dirty. That widget then triggers a rebuild. It gets marked as clean. And then finally, whenever the widget goes away, dispose is called. There are a couple other options here. Once you have a clean widget, you can call set state. This is what that counter was doing that we removed just a moment ago. Excuse me. And then did update widget. This one's a little bit more tricky. The documentation would be a really great source for this, but I believe this is the one that gets triggered whenever a stateful widget gets updated. So remember how I mentioned the other day that the state and the widget are two separate things. So the state can be aware of when the widget gets updated as well. And that would be did update widget. Okay, so let's wrap this up by adding an init state method. We need to call super.init state. And then we want to call quote view model dot load quotes. I'm going to save this. It probably won't run because we've already initialized this state. So what we can do is do a hard refresh right here, or a hard restart. And then, hey, our quote loaded. That's awesome. Great, we have it working again. It's a little weird to start this video with basically the same screen that we're getting at the end of the video, but the point being we've refactored everything out into its own view. We've added a view model, a fairly robust view model, in fact. And, oh, we have one more thing that I want to change, right? So we know that our state is a stream controller, and we don't want to expose a stream controller, right? So we have a couple options. So we can, something needs to be a stream controller. So what we can do, this is probably the simplest solution, would be to rename this and add an underscore at the beginning. This makes it private. Maybe. Oh, the refactoring tools are not enjoying that. I'll give it another 5 seconds and see what happens. Okay, it tells me that the renamed field will be invisible in quote view.dart. Yeah, that's fine. Rename it. I'll worry about that in a minute. So now what we can do is we can either create a new variable called state, or we could do another method called state. And we'll use a getter for this method. And we just want to return the stream, right? Oh, must be declared without a parameter list. Yep. So this is a little bit of, it's not exactly syntactic sugar, but this is a way to declare a getter, just like what we had here originally, a public getter. But this actually executes a body of code every time that that getter is called. So in this case, we're taking that state that we just made private and we're saying, just give me the stream. So not the stream controller, just the stream. Now that means we can go back to our view here and we can just remove this entirely and replace it with state. Do a hot reload. I'm gonna hit this button one more time, make sure it still works. There it is. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, Marcus Aurelius. Another great quote. I think that's where we'll wrap up today. I know we didn't get to any interaction yet, so we will tackle that tomorrow, I suppose. And we'll start with this floating action button. Will give us a nice new icon, like pencil maybe? Pencil's not an icon. I guess we can talk about icon kits too. Edit. There we go. So if I save this, we have a little pencil and you can click it, nothing happens. Tomorrow we'll make it actually do something. Okay. I'm back. I didn't mention this yesterday, so I figured I'd mention it today. All these videos are going to be on a playlist on my channel, so if you happen to stumble upon this one or any other of the videos, it's called Flutter Advent 2023. So just make your way to that playlist, start from the beginning, make sure you don't miss anything, because if you follow the steps step by step, you'll have a working app by the time, well, at this step, you'll have a working app. You'll have a nice working app by the time Christmas rolls around. So it'd be a fun thing to show off to your friends or family or publish on the App Store. What you do with it is up to you. I think that's it. Have a great day.